how to successfully without burning out, which is one of those things that I know is on everyone's mind when it comes to fundraising, especially this new year. I'm going to come off screen share really quickly and just talk to everyone. Happy New Year. Hopefully everyone had a good restful holiday. A lot of people I know were getting stuff done, but I do hope you were able to unplug because this is a new year and we're jumping into some of the harder stuff right away. I want people to start by throwing in the chat and just saying where in the world you are. What city are you guys in? I'm in Los Angeles, but I think we have the fortunate benefit of having an international community. So we see a lot of people from all over the place. Nairobi. Wow, that's a new one for us. Very cool, Joel. New York. Good. Isan, good to see you, man, in LA. Do we have any Brazil this time around? Oh, we do. Rodrigo, good to see you. Washington, D.C. with Kim, which is around where I grew up in Virginia. Okay. Awesome. Looks like we have a good international crowd. One other poll I want to run just to see where people's minds are. Let's throw that poll up, John, to see if you guys got settled into any New Year's resolutions.
Jason, can you actually set the poll because you logged in after me?
Oh, amazing. I actually know how to do that. Polls.
Go to more.
Launch. Got it. There we go. Let's see. Did anyone set a New Year's resolution? Okay, it's flowing in nice and quick. This is a proactive and overachieving bunch. I definitely thought we'd have more in the not yet, but I plan to, which is halfway where I am. I have some goals in mind, but I need to set more. Just always slightly behind where I want to be. Give you guys another few seconds. All right. We have a pretty good understanding of what people we're at. Well, I hope that one of your goals, if you're joining this workshop, is around doing your best around fundraising and upcoming fundraise in 2024. I'll show where people ended up to see what category you were in. We had about 56% say they have goals in mind. 27% at a no, and then another 16% say not yet, but I plan to. Great. All right, so jumping in, I will start my workshops with a bit of housekeeping. So let's go through them. Let's make sure you have your cameras on. Camera on status is really important to me because as I'm going through the content, I'm actually looking at your faces and trying to see if I'm saying the right things or at least things that are making sense. So if I can't see your face, I can't tell if you're nodding along like Nels is or if you're furrowing your brow and not really understanding what I'm saying. And I can adjust on the fly if I can see your face. So please turn your cameras on. Just know that the Zoom chat is open. It's one of the best places to be in our workshops. A lot of good interaction, a lot of good connecting happens. So feel free to engage. There are some questions in there. If you have them, we'll try to get to them when we have time. And make sure you take notes. If you have a document, a piece of paper, or remarkable pad, take notes because we'll be going through a few processes and tactical things today that I'm sure you'll want to take home to your or to the side and actually execute on afterwards. You don't want this to be edutainment and just listening to this for fun. You actually want to get some stuff done. And then if there are any insights that you see that you feel other people could benefit from, feel free to share on social. We're not trying to protect this or anything. We'd love to have them shared. And if you tag us, we'll do our best to amplify your post. And the last thing that I always tell people is these workshops are as interactive as we can make them. And so if we ask for volunteers or I look for an answer, feel free to volunteer. The people that interact with me, I think will get the most out of things. So raise your hand and note that if people don't volunteer, I am known for cold calling and seeing if people will engage with me on the spot. One last thing about this, if you are not the person that volunteers or gets cold called, remember that you're not going to get anything out of this if you just sit back and kind of laugh at the person because they're put on the spot. What you should be doing is simulating in your head, what would I have done if Jason asked me those questions? What would my answer be? How would I approach this? You want to simulate and give yourself as many reps as possible. All right. Okay. So before we get into the real content, I always like sharing a little bit about what I see in the field and essentially why we do this, right? This image is meant to represent just how hard it is to be a startup founder, how hard it is to fundraise. It's, you're walking through the desert. You've got a ton on your back, a lot of responsibilities. And it just seems like there's so many people just waiting for you to fail in the media. And in your head, you just feel like these people are watching you. And so I recognize that. And I recognize that. I also note and see why so many deserving founders, people that have great backgrounds, skill sets, ambitions, products, problems that they're trying to solve, why the people doing the right things still end up messing up their fundraises, or are at least confused enough to even hold themselves back from starting. It makes sense. And it's because I really feel like information gets trickled out without context, kind of gets held back into these dark corners of the ecosystem of expertise. Experts out there who are teaching very specific point solutions around how to build a deck, maybe how to story tell, without actually thinking about the whole encompassing thing. And for us, and for me in particular, it's really about process. And my belief is that all these things that are hidden do not get delivered to you with the right process, which is something that you'll hear me talk a lot about over these next couple of days. And I just want you all to know that while a lot of these things may be scary, it can totally be done. I've seen people from a variety of different backgrounds, a variety of different networks actually execute great fundraising processes and close capital. It can be done. And note that, like, when you get those rejection, which I know you all have told people your story, you all have told people your company, you've had people say no to you, you've had people tell you the company's not right, or maybe you're not right, but just know that these people don't understand what you're working on. That's the thing. They just don't understand what you're working on, and we will work on the processes that help them better understand. And while this all might feel a little bit uncomfortable, putting yourself in a difficult situation, doing work that you don't want to do, know that the things that you guys are pursuing, these like big dreams that you guys have, are all worth it. This is why we're putting in the effort. This is why you're here just a few days into the new year trying to learn this stuff, because these big dreams are worth it. And the last thing I'll say is just, you might be thinking that like you just don't know the right specific thing to do, or that other people understand some kind of secret approach to things. And I will say that I think you're right. I think you're right that there are like secret steps, either explicitly that people are incorporating into their fundraise, or just through natural feel, and because they have a ton of experience, they are doing things that you're not doing. And we're going to make sure that we try to uncover the three most important ones in these 2 days. Okay. So everyone here, I want to make sure that you're here for the right reasons and you're the right people. These workshops and the work that we do is for great founders who are ready to raise venture capital dollars, right? Money that is used to scale large businesses. And our goal here in this 2-day workshop is to deliver some of the most important keys to unlocking this. Okay, so you're signing up for a 2-part workshop. Today, in day 1, I want to talk about important tactics and 3 fundraising keys that we think you can incorporate into your overall fundraising process that will make you more successful. And then on day 2, we'll get into more of the, how do we piece all these things together? How do we actually execute on those things? So those are day 1 and day 2 of our 2-part workshop. Okay. Just to give a bit of background on the work that we do, so you understand what you're talking about, or who you're talking to. 95% of the work that we do really is to change the way founders around the world fundraise. And we do that through completely free content. our weekly newsletter, our podcasts, workshops like these, tools, and other services that we put out there. 5% of the stuff we do is around additional support, including our fundraising prep accelerator program called Fundraise with Confidence. The next cohort is starting in about 3 weeks. So we'll share more about that later, but wanted to make sure that you understand what we do. Okay. A bit of background on me. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I think some of you know my background, but if you are new to my content, here's a bit of background. I was the head of new media products at MLB.com. After that, I became a venture capitalist. I was a VC at Graycroft for about 4 years, generalist investor across a bunch of different industries, saw hundreds of deals get done, saw thousands of pitches. And then I became a co-founder and CEO of a venture-backed startup called Tape. We raised money from big venture capital firms. We had an exit in 2020. When I then shifted over to this work, first, I was an internal fundraising coach for Silicon Valley Bank. And then I actually launched Adamant, my company that is designed and focused on making fundraising easier and more accessible to as many founders as possible through the development of processes, the right fundraising processes at the right time. All right. So that's the background of what we're getting into. I am now going to start interacting with you and making sure that we all understand what we need to get through here. And to warm things up, I'm going to start with a very simple question. Some of you have been in parts of these workshops, so you might know the answer here, but here's a simple one. What is fundraising? Okay. I'm going to try to interact with someone I haven't seen before. If you have an idea in your own mind of how you would describe fundraising, raise your digital hand or even your physical hand, because actually I think Zoom is quite good at detecting these sort of things. Who wants to talk to me really quickly? Oh, Rafael. Or is that Brazilian? Is it Rafa?
No, it's Rafael.
Rafael.
Hi.
First, Rafael, where in the world are you?
I'm sorry, I'm in Netanya, Israel.
Israel. Oh, wow. Hope you guys are staying safe out there.
Yeah,
as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we have you describe a little bit about fundraising? What do you think fundraising is?
So I had it described to me quite in an interesting way not too long ago, which I like the way that is put to me, is that fundraising is essentially selling part of your company. So you're gaining equity, obviously you're gaining cash in exchange for selling your company. So it's something that I think that founders should always keep in mind, is that you shouldn't just raise if you're going to give away a larger and larger chunk of your company. So you should always keep that in mind. It's sort of a conservative view on fundraising, but it's actually a founder that sort of put it to me that way. So
no,
I like that.
I love that. I think that's a very important part of the understanding of what the impact of fundraising is. The result of fundraising.
Well, obviously it's raising cash for marketing, for hiring, etc., but we should always keep in mind. So you
I'm not gonna
think you're selling your company.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'm not going to let you off the hook there. I actually want you to describe a little bit about what you think fundraising is, the actual process. What does fundraising look like to you? What do you do when you fundraise?
Okay. All right. So the actual process, I'd say, fundraising is defining or finding a way to communicate what your company does, what your idea is, where your sort of plans are for the next 3, 5, 7 years sometimes, and communicating that to a bunch of people that you're hoping will follow you on the journey, help you by sort of providing you with the capital that you need to begin with, hopefully guiding you, maybe giving you advice, being on your board of directors, etc., and following you on that journey to reach the dreams that you have.
Love it. That's a great way to start describing the company. You talked a lot about communicating it to people that you hope will follow you in the journey. Thank you for being the first volunteer to interact. Let me talk a little bit about what I know it isn't, and then how I describe it. So a lot of people, when they extend on what Raphael said, which he said, communicating to people this certain thing, Sometimes they'll twist it and be like, well, if I study what Jason has to say or what some of the other fundraising experts, maybe I'll be able to convince or essentially like strangle somebody into giving me money, trick them into giving me money. And I want to make sure you guys know that fundraising is not about tricking people into giving you money. And it's true that if you study this long and hard enough, if you understand the psychology, if you understand the methodology that we'll talk about within fundraising well enough, you actually probably could trick people into fundraising, into investing in you. I'll say that, like, I know this well enough where I could probably jump into Perry's company. I could jump into Hannah's company and pretend to be the founder and raise capital. That's how well I know it. But this would be a terrible outcome. Fundraising shouldn't happen if you're not worth it and you're not ready to do those things. So I want to make sure that we all know and understand that. What I think fundraising is it's about demonstrating that you are a great fundraising and investment opportunity, and then having investors discover that. It's a slightly different way of describing it from what Raphael talked about. And the reason I say that is because the mentality that I want people to have when they're fundraising is this idea of chase versus be chased. A lot of founders, as they're getting into this, think about, oh my God, I need money. I need money. I need to find money. And Raphael said, I hope these people will follow me on my journey. And maybe if I can communicate them and tell them like why I'm so good, they will follow me. What we really need to change, both in your mindset and the way you approach the process, is that it needs to be set up in a way that instead of chasing these dollars, you're doing what it takes to get the investors to chase you, that you are setting yourself up as a great opportunity and one that they cannot miss. So that will impact a lot of what you do and is one of the baselines that we always start with. Okay, so chase or be chased. You want to be chased. Second, I like this exercise because I want everyone focused in on the right mind space around the company and fundraising in general. So again, we're only going to talk to one person, but you should run through this yourself as I talk to someone there. So I want to talk to one person who will tell me a little bit about what they're doing and the simple question of why they're doing that. So if you could raise your hand and volunteer. I'd love to understand. Let's see. Looking for, okay. Isan. Let's talk to, how are you, man? Good to see you.
All right, I'm eating. I'm hungry. What am I doing
Good.
this for?
Yeah, and you're in LA, right?
Yes, in
Very
Los
good.
Angeles.
Well, give me a 30-second description of what you're doing. Don't try to sell me on it. Just tell us all what you're working on and what the name of the company is.
Yeah. At Scenario, we're building a life designer so people can build a good life.
Love it.
Why am I doing it?
Yeah, why are you doing it?
The reason I'm doing it is the same thing as the company's mission, which is to empower everyone to build a good life.
Okay. Why is the
Financially,
mission,
socially.
why is the mission of empowering everyone to live a good life important to you?
To build a good life. It's important to me because there's so much market and social dynamics that make it even harder and harder, especially for the newer generation, whether it's millennials or Gen Z. It's not getting easier, not just financially, also economically, and it trickles down into people's well-being. So instead of waiting for policies and stuff, we need solutions now.
Okay. So why is the fact that it's becoming more difficult for the next generation, especially Gen Z and so on, to build a good life? Why is that important to you?
It's important to me because I empathize with them. I have experienced myself what it could be like, for example, coming out of college and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to apply for jobs. And you get one. And then you're like, oh, damn, I can't even afford living in LA or New York City, working as a writer, making 60K. I didn't know that. I wish I did. Now I can barely even, let's say, afford to have a kid. Well, that sucks. I wish I knew that.
Right.
So those are
So you've
examples.
experienced the problem yourself, right? You experienced the problem
Oh yeah.
yourself, and wanting to build a company around this. Tell me more about why that's important to you.
I'll tell you why. So first, I did not want to be a founder. I worked somewhere where I noticed, holy cow, founder is a Dollar Shave Club and so on. That's a rough life. But then I got obsessed with this problem. And yeah, there's so many startups and so many smart people, innovation. But to be real with you, Jason, I got angry. There's so many freaking smart people, so much innovation, and yet this is a problem. And what people point to is, oh, we need to improve people's education. We need to make them learn better. So we're going to do things like quote unquote financial literacy. That's too slow. We need solutions now.
Got it. Okay. Son, thanks for going through that exercise with me now. I want to highlight what we just did here because it's extremely important for two sides. It's really important for the founder, you guys all, to do this for yourself. And it's also really important for you to do it for you to do it because you need to get ready to be able to project that for investors. If you'll notice, like Isan had a pretty good set of initial answers to the question, very polished, right? Very polished around the problems of Gen Z and how it is to build a better life. But even with that sort of that pure intention, when we ask why and keep going down multiple layers to understand, well, why is that important? Why are you doing this? It's going to be the thing that continues to drive you to do something that's really difficult. He talked a little bit about him seeing firsthand about how difficult it is to be a founder. And I'll tell you, do you know the other type of person that knows how difficult it is to be a founder? Can anyone guess in the chat? It's investors, right? Investors understand how hard it is to be a founder. And if they don't think that you have a great answer for why you're doing this, it's probably not going to be a founder that they want to back. I'll tell you this. Investors are looking for something either explicitly, they will explicitly be asking around this, or implicitly, they're going to be looking for something which I wish I had coined this term, but I took it from a friend of mine, Sarah, VC, which is called purity of motivation. They may have a very explicit set of questions that they get to be like, Anissa, why are you doing this? Like, out of all the things that you could be doing, Anissa, why are you doing this? John Wall's here. John Wall, why are you doing this? You know, you could be making $500,000 a year. Certainly, everyone here could be making tons and tons more money, but why are you doing this? They have to understand there's purity of motivation so that they know that when you run into a wall, you'll run through it. And I'll tell you this, most founders that are here, because the fact that you're here means that you're hardworking. And if you're hardworking, you'll say, yeah, if I run into 5 walls, I'm going to run through all of them to get this done. But 5 is not what you're going to experience. It's going to be like 10, 20. And what you'll see is that, yeah, great hardworking people will get through all these walls. But like at 10 times, at 20 times, you start thinking to yourself, wouldn't it be nice to just make $300,000 a year working as a product manager at Google? Right? And so if you really aren't dedicated to the problem of making Gen Z's approach to building a better life, if you're actually not purely motivated to do it, then you're not. And so I put this out there as a personal challenge for everyone, but also as a preparation for what you're going to have to be able to communicate to investors, what they're going to have to feel from you to keep going. Okay, so that's the baseline of how we're starting on this journey together. But now I want to shift gears to the more tactical stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about 3 fundraising keys. These 3 are not the only keys, but they're ones that I think will really move the needle if we can get through them today. So they're investor psychology, your killer narrative, and preparation and process. Okay. We're going to start with the first one here. And I want to ask everyone, You guys seen this exercise before? Sell me this pen. No. Mira's shaking her head no, which means that I want to call on her.
Best movie of all time.
Amira, how are you?
I'm swell.
You're slow. No, that's okay. Is it, where in the world are you?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn. Okay. So it's early afternoon, maybe a little bit sleepy from lunch.
Yeah.
You've never heard the question, sell me this pen?
No.
Good. Okay. Perfect. And there is really no answer. This is just a demonstration. So a lot of times when you go through a sales interview, one of the things that you'll hear this very stereotypical question will be like, oh, Amir, you'd like this role as a sales executive at Adamant. Here's a pen. Sell me this pen. And I actually want us to go through the exercise. So you remember the image? I'll throw it up there really quickly so you see it one more time. Okay. I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. I want you to try to sell me this pen.
Like right now?
Yeah. And don't worry, like this is a good exercise for everyone, and I appreciate you being brave enough to be cold called.
Okay. Okay. This is the greatest pen you're ever gonna have in your life. Once in a lifetime opportunity. You know what? That's all I got. I'm not even gonna lie, that's all I have right now.
That's okay. Actually, you've already done, everyone give her like sort of a visual applause. That was not easy to do.
Poetry snaps, yes.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Amir. Okay, so Amira actually did what most founders do. I mean, what she did was exactly what I might expect most people to do, right? When founders, like Raphael said, founders fundraising is you're selling a bit of your company. And what the initial instinct is for someone to do when they're selling something is to do exactly what Mira did. This is the best pen you've ever seen. It'll blow your mind. You start talking about all the amazing things about the pen. But if you go through any traditional sales training process, one of the first things they will tell you to become a great salesperson is that you have to get into the mind of the buyer. How are you supposed to sell somebody a product without knowing what their intentions are, what their motivations are for buying? Because if you didn't realize this, the only reason I wanted a pen actually wasn't to write. It's actually to be a paperweight. And if you knew that, then really the only thing that I care about is the aesthetic and how heavy it is. But you wouldn't know that unless you asked me a question. And so most sales training, actually the right answer to sell me this pen would start off by saying, oh, Mira, I'd love to tell you about this pen, but before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about your company, right? Because if she starts telling me a little bit about her company, then I understand what she's looking for in a pen. So why do I do that demonstration? I do that demonstration to illustrate the fact that 99% of founders, when they go into fundraising, don't know almost anything about the buyer. They don't know enough about VCs to really be great at influencing their quote unquote buying decision. Okay. So when we talk about investor psychology, we're not going to have enough time to go through all the different parts of investor psychology. But what I want to push you guys towards is to better understand how investors make decisions. And I know a lot of you are like, I know this. Maybe you were an investment banker. Maybe you worked in private equity. Maybe you have an MBA. Maybe you watched Silicon Valley, the show. That's not enough. I'm telling you because some of my closest friends are MBAs. And when they went to go fundraise for the first time and they started seeing what was happening, they were like, how is this possible? Some of them were MBAs that had been hedge fund investors before. And when they got to early stage fundraising, they were like, how is this possible? Right? So you guys need to get great at understanding how investors make decisions. And I'm going to give you a mini process to follow. It's all about process when it comes to the way we approach fundraising. I believe processes will unlock everything for you. So here's the learning process that I want you guys to follow. And if you're taking notes, please take notes here. So 3 really simple steps. I want you to break down the VC business model. And when I say break down the VC business model, you got to write it out. Like, if you want to prove to me that you understand how investors make decisions, you should at least be able to describe what a VC business model is. And as a guidance, essentially follow the money. Think about the dollar that's going in. Where did they get that dollar? How are they putting it in? How are they getting money out of that? If you can't, you try to answer as much of that process as you can. And then step 2, list out the questions that you have, essentially the blind spots that you have, the things that as you started to describe it, you're like, actually don't know how that works, or I don't know how that happens. You're going to want to list out the questions and be honest, right? You need to really uncover what you don't know. And once you have that, you then have the opportunity to interview an investor or someone that knows the investment process well. If you were my cousin, you'd call me up and say, hey, you want to know more about the VC business model? I think I understand it. Can I describe to you what I know and then ask you questions and see if I have it right? And I would be able to help you. If you guys have that person in your network, that's going to be step 3. But the beauty of this is, in the last year, we've been able to update this. Most people didn't have great access to an expert, but now all of us do. You can actually go to ChatGPT and train that robot to become an investor. You can tell it, hey, you are an investor GPT now. I'd like to ask you some questions about the way you make decisions. Okay?
Hey, Jason, super quick. It looks
Yeah.
like your camera turned off.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's annoying. We're going to try this again. So we're going to hopefully not overheat. This is probably what's happening right here. And I will try to sure that. All right. I have a lot of technical difficulties here. I'm a little embarrassed that we're going to go off my super special camera and go to FaceTime. All right. So
We
there
can see
we
it.
go.
Okay.
Awesome. Let's get back into it. Sorry about that. Thanks, Paige. So you're gonna get a recording here in case you need to write this down, but this learning process is important. We want to get you the baseline for understanding fundraising. Okay. Fundraising and the investor decision-making process. Small plug too. I have a couple pieces of content that we release every week. Written format is our fundraising field notes newsletter. Comes out weekly on Tuesdays, so you can subscribe there. And we also have a couple different podcast formats that does a lot to sort of break apart the different elements of fundraising and investor psychology. All right. Second, we're going to talk through a killer narrative and what that means. So I think killer narratives and storytelling, that's all the rage now. It's probably the thing that you guys have been thinking about the most. I do think it's important. I don't think it's necessarily the most important thing on its own, but certainly important enough that we spend time on it. The most important thing for me when it comes to the killer narrative actually is the process of building a narrative. I think that is so important and so transformative. And it's why we spend time here. I tell people that the process of building a great narrative is so important. The journey of that is really the destination. Okay. And the story I always tell here and the analogy I give, which is very similar, is when I was applying to business school, I was told, oh, put a lot into the application process. The application process is transformative. You should do it just for the application process. And I would like roll my eyes at that. Felt like something people just say, but it's something that I fully experienced. There's always an essay, no matter what school you apply to, that's like, what are you going to do with your MBA? Why are you applying to your MBA? And it wasn't until that point that I actually even thought about, like, what am I doing and what is my career going to be? And I ended up writing this essay that was about my background in tech and building and how I wanted to build more and build more companies. And it really sort of put me on the path that I'm on today. And it likely wouldn't have happened or wouldn't have happened as fast if I hadn't forced myself to actually go through that process. And this is the same thing for working on a killer narrative. What I tell people is like, you're going to try to build an amazing story that you tell people, and you're going to build an amazing deck, and you're going to choose what goes in there. And there will be these times when you kick things out of your deck. You're like, oh, I don't know if I have room for the deck, for it in the deck. So maybe we won't talk about that. And it turns out like, if you don't have space in it on your deck, and you don't want to focus on it in your story, then should you be focusing on it in your company? Like the limited resources, limited time. If you're not putting it into your story, then it probably shouldn't be something you're working on in your company. And there are many different things in terms of building your story and your narrative that fall into this category. If you're going to work on your story, it's going to affect your company. And I always tell people, or I always show people this meme because it refers to so many things in startups and fundraising. It's like people get annoyed. They're like, oh, like a focused narrative, and like, oh, I'm just changing my narrative to sound better to investors. And another example is, I'm putting financials together to at least put my appendix. And I don't ever have financials ready to go, but I'm just doing it to sound better to investors. Well, it turns out the things that sound better to investors because they're indicative of a business that's being better run. So are you doing things to sound better to investors, or are you trying to run a better business? Most of the things that you'll run into in fundraising fall into these categories. So all this work that we're talking about is super important. So focus in on it. All right. So narratives. Let's talk about narrative goals. I have an acronym that I think you can put in the back of your head, maybe an image to make yourself remember this, but it's BIG around narratives. In general, you want to make your narrative brief. It needs to be interesting, and it has to be grandiose. Now, that wouldn't be the case if you weren't raising venture capital dollars, but your narrative for this company that you're trying to get VCs to invest in has to be brief in order to catch them when they don't have time. It has to be interesting enough for them to lean in, and it has to be grandiose enough to fit into their business model. These are three things that it will be easy for you to tuck in the back of your head to always be asking yourself, does it fit the big model? So we're going to go through a few frameworks that I think are very helpful in driving towards these three things. And two or three of my favorite ones, depending on time. So the first one is the nod along effect. This is my test for how your story gets told, how it feels when someone's listening to it, how you're able to drive someone forward within a pitch. But it's this idea that you need to keep an investor nodding along at every step, nodding along, bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to the final nod. And Morgan, I'm going to call on you real quick. What do you want to have happen in that final nod? You nod and you get to that final nod. What do you want that investor to say?
Sounds amazing.
Sounds amazing. What else?
I agree.
I agree to what?
I agree that your business is, that your strategy is compelling.
That's all you want them to say?
Where do I wire?
Great. Okay. I was bullying you into saying the wrong thing. That is the thing that people think they're trying to do. It's like nodding along. What do you want them to say? And most founders go, yes, I'll invest. It's actually not true, right? You were probably closer in the very beginning of what you were saying. What we're trying to get them to do in those conversations is to go nod and say, yes, I'd like to learn more. Okay. So this is what we're trying to get done. And once people understand that it's not about convincing someone in one interaction or one read of the deck. And it's really just more about getting them to lean in. That's when you start changing the way you think about your narrative development. Thanks for doing that, Morgan. So what does the nod along effect look like visually? Well, it looks more like this, where you want people to hear the first thing you have to say and go, interesting. Hear the second thing that you say and go, oh, yeah, what's the next slide? What's the next slide? What's the next slide? And now there are multiple ways that this can actually be put out. It can be a nice linear path that builds momentum, that keeps people excited all the way to the end. It can be, you've probably seen this and people post it, you can really accelerate to the end and say like, and this is our goal, which makes people go, oh, how do you get to the goal? And then you keep telling the story. But whatever it is, you need them to keep nodding along. So things that can break momentum are confusion, slides that are overly dense where they have to stare at it to understand it, an obvious open question that they need to ask because they're confused. And one of the bigger things that people mess up is that they believe that if I give you a story, or if I get 15 minutes of your time, or if I get a 10, 12 slide deck into your hands, then that means that the investor is going to spend the full time consuming everything and then make the decision whether or not they're interested. When that isn't the way investor minds work. The way it works is they will keep listening until they're not interested. And if they get to the third slide and they're like, I have no idea what's going on, they'll tap through really quickly or just close it. If they get to 5 to 10 minutes into your pitch and it's not interesting, but you still have 20 more minutes, they'll stay there, but they're going to zone out. So you need to make every step interesting enough for them to continue on, to continue on, to continue on. Okay, that's the nod along effect. All right. So when we talk about brief and the nod along effect, one of the things that gets you there is this idea of being simply impressive. I run into a lot of founders who, when they go start pitching for the first time, they have a lot of imposter syndrome. They feel like, oh my God, they know I'm not supposed to be here. They don't think that I should be here. They don't think that I belong here. And their reaction to that is that I need to credential myself. I need to show them that I am an expert in this space. And one of the ways that manifests itself is when founders start showing the depth of their knowledge, and especially in these first pitches, start talking about the complex parts of their business, the acronyms of the industry. And all that does is it shoots the founder in the foot. They shoot themselves in the foot, because there are a couple situations that they'll run into in terms of the type of investor that they're talking to. In one case, maybe the investor doesn't understand and doesn't really get what you're saying. One of the things that could happen is that the investor is like confused and says like, gosh, Jesse, I don't understand. You got to stop. You got to tell me what's going on. And that's pretty bad, but that's not the worst. The worst is if they don't say anything and they just let you go and they really didn't understand anything and they asked for you to clarify. That's more likely the situation because investors have egos and they don't like feeling like they don't understand things. The flip side is if you decide to go overly simple and spoon feed the investor, which is what I want you all to do, the worst case scenario in that situation is that the person does know the space that you're talking about. And they go, Seth, I get it. I worked in this industry for 10 years. We can keep going. Awesome. Everyone's on the same page and you keep going, right? So what I tell people is when you're thinking about how to tell your story, you really want to go to the lowest common denominator. You really want to be as simple as possible. You really want to think about how would you pitch the circle and not the equation, right? Don't tell me pi r squared and pi is the ratio, the diameter, whatever, diameter to the circumference or whatever it is. Just show me a black circle, right? That's how you should be trying to pitch your business. When it comes to simplicity too, you'll hear me talk about going less is more. Less is more. I always tell people we're going to get to a 10 slide target because the best founders who deeply understand their problem and how they're solving it can describe their company in 10 slides. One of the biggest red flags I have is when I talk to a founder and they have like 20 slides and I'm like, we got to get to 10 slides, and they fight me on it. They're like, no, maybe 18 slides. It means that founder doesn't really know why their company exists. A founder that really knows, really deeply knows why their company exists can do it in a number, like a handful of slides. So what you'll see a lot of is this idea of less is more, is carving away, carving away, carving away. The words in a sentence, the sentences on a slide, the slides on a deck, you're going to be carving away to try to get to the clearest version of your story, something that really, really stands out. Okay. So think about less is more in almost all your communications. It also goes for your emails, the emails that you write to investors, the words that you use in your pitch. Okay. And one thing that we're not going to do live today, but that I like running through with people, is a rubber band exercise. Does anyone know what a rubber band exercise is? I'm not sure if anyone's heard this concept before. I don't think we have time to go through it. Okay, so a rubber band exercise, they're called rubber band exercises because you got like this rubber band, right? And the exercise is to stretch the rubber band further than its normal constitution, so that when you let go of it, it reforms itself, but it's a little bit stretched out from where it was before. So the stretched out version is not reality. That's not where you have to be, but doing so gets you to a place that you're closer to where you want to be. So in this situation, in deck building, we have a rubber band exercise that we go through that I think you guys should all do on your own. And it's the 6-slide deck. 6-slide deck is this. It's like, if I talk to Andrew and I say, we have a 10-slide goal, we've already talked about that. No. I want you to show me what your 6-slide deck would be. And that doesn't mean going and jamming all the content you had in 15 slides into 6 slides. Like, that's cheating, and that doesn't get you anywhere. It is, if you had 6 simple slides, in fact, you can do it with bullet points. If you had 6 bullet points essentially to represent your story, what would they be? That goes so far over the top of being short that it really helps you start from scratch almost. And then once you have those 6 slides, you have a chance to ask people, with these 6 slides, with these 6 bullet points, what's confusing to you? What do you have questions about? What do you wish you had more about? And from there, you can be like, oh, I need to add one more slide. So if I give you one more slide and you have 7 slides, that helps. Well, what if I give you an 8th slide? And if I give you an 8th slide, what would that be? And you get to the 8th. And a lot of times you'll get to the 9th slide and feel like, I feel like I've covered my story. And that's a beautiful place to be. The rubber band exercise is actually part of a narrative development process that I like working through, that I'm, sharpening right now. And this is one of these mini processes that I want you guys to come away with. So if you're building your deck, let's have you at least consider this process in building your deck. 5 rounds with feedback. And I'm digitally putting up 5 hands too through Zoom. 5 rounds with feedback. One of the things that we see happen most with founders is they do so much in their head and they do so much internally. So they'll build their deck, they'll even practice their pitches, but they'll do it by themselves and not get feedback. And the problem with this is that founders are way, way, way too close to their business to give themselves accurate feedback. Like, you think something is completely understandable because you know it so well. And it just becomes like overly complicated. Or you're so close to your company, you're like, oh, this slide, this detail is so important. It's like, it's such a special part of my company. And where if you were to ask somebody externally about it, they'd be like, nah, doesn't really move the needle. So you need to go through 5 different rounds, 5 different versions. By this 5th version, if you follow this process, your narrative, your deck will be great. So for First draft is the rubber band exercise that I told you about. Second draft is a shitty first draft, just kind of getting from 6 slides to more like 10 slides. You're going to get tons of feedback around each version. By the third version, you'll be updating content. And we haven't even started thinking about like important images yet, maybe placeholder images. But by the fourth draft, you can start putting visuals in. And by the fifth draft, you're going to get to polish. But what you need to set up is enough people to give you third-party feedback to be able to get to a point where the story makes sense and is clearly understandable. All right. So that was our portion on the narrative. We're doing well. We have about 20 minutes left, so I think we can get through this. The third part is preparation and process. This is the third fundraising key. This is probably the least sexy, but the most impactful, the one that doesn't get talked a lot about on social media unless you follow me. And it is really all about how important preparation is and the process is in unlocking fundraising. When I talk about this, I always give this Abraham Lincoln quote. I know a lot of you are not from the US, so maybe not as impactful, but Abraham Lincoln, 16th president of the United States, Honest Abe, a really important part of American history, said this: given 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe. And that is what you should think about when it comes to fundraising, and something that very few founders do. They do not spend enough time preparing for the fundraise. They only launch the fundraise when it feels like there's a gun to their head. So because you guys are here, you guys are going to make sure that you don't do that, which I'm happy about. So let's talk about it. The process is really all about getting people to move, right? When I think about getting people to understand this, I usually share this analogy. Call it investor poker. So if you were to think about investing or fundraising as a game of Texas Hold'em, hopefully some of you understand this analogy. If not, I'll give you some context or some talk track around it. In investor poker, let's say I'm an investor, or an investor meets Aiko and finds out that she worked in the industry that she is trying to impact before. And not only that, but her co-founder is someone she worked with before. That would be the equivalent of a really good hand. Maybe we call it pocket aces, because two of the biggest problems that investors sees is the ability to really validate a problem. And they also know that one of the biggest downfalls for startups is co-founder conflict. So if a founder actually worked in an industry and knows the problem space well, you check off that first box. And if they had worked together in the past, there's less of a chance that there will be some co-founder conflict that blows up the company. So it's like pocket aces. So if Aiko is speaking to an investor, does the investor decide right away on pocket aces to place a bet? Maybe, maybe not. Then maybe she waits for the flop and 3 cards come out and she's on a flush draw, but also on a straight draw, straight flush draw, 3 different amazing hands that she could get. It would be like finding out that Aiko had already landed her first 3 big customers. It would be like talking to some people in the industry and getting diligence that made people tell the investor, oh my God, this is one of the craziest things we've ever seen. It's amazing, right? Does the investor place her bet then? I don't know if anyone knows what my answer is here. The answer is the investor will always wait to see the next card. Always, 1000% of the time. If an investor has the ability to wait to see the next card, they will always wait to see the next card. It's your responsibility to do everything you can within fundraising to make them feel like they need to place a bet. So they need to feel like they'll either lose the deal to somebody else or lose the terms of the deal. As in, if they don't invest now, you're just going to keep making progress So the valuation is going to change. If you don't do those things, you will run into what we call the most common fundraising mistake. The most common fundraising mistake is actually fundraising without a process. It's Alan going to talk to Jorge and being like, Jorge, I know you're an investor. Let me pitch you. And Jorge being like, maybe. And then Alan going, okay, who else do I pitch? Jason. Oh, I know. I can get in touch with Jason. Can you make me an introduction page? Okay. Jason, let me pitch you. And Jason says no. Okay, who else do I pitch? Go find the next person. And what you then see, this is what most people do, is they just kind of in spurts, talk to an investor, talk to an investor, talk to an investor. So you have all these conversations that are daisy chained together, one to the next, to the next. It's really this idea, I know what drives it. It's founders being like, well, you know, if I talk to Thomas and he says yes, then I don't have to talk to anyone else, and I avoid the pain, right? But that just doesn't work. What we need to have you do is run a real process. And what I share with people is this. It looks a lot like this. If you run those single processes, it's like a single arrow, right? Single arrow is easily broken, but a bundle of 10 is not. And in this case, we're going to be talking about a bundle of at least 100 target investors. And if you can do that, then you'll be running a real process. This is what I started becoming known for, which is the concept of calendar density. The main part of launching a great fundraise starts at the beginning and starts with your ability to create calendar density, which is essentially your first 2 or 3 weeks of meetings, all packed into those 2 weeks, 3 to 5 meetings a day for 2 to 3 weeks. If you can achieve calendar density, you've started the process that will actually get investors to move. Now, it's easy to just say, oh yeah, do it. A lot of people would push me on this the first time I would give this workshop. They wouldn't question me on it during the workshop. They would come later and they'd be like, okay, it's easier said than that. I actually tried to do it, but like, you know, you ask for intros, they come interspersed and whatever. So I've added this slide to the workshop, which is the skeleton key, the unlock for actually getting calendar density done is this little bit of judo, a little bit of change. Most people, when they think about launching a fundraise, they're like, okay, I got to go fundraise. I got to start talking to people. I got to start asking people for introductions. I want to talk to Wenjing and like, can I get an intro there? I'll ask a bunch of people. There's a small shift that changes things that allows you to unlock calendar density. And it's this. When you launch your fundraise and when you launch intros, the launch of your fundraise is not going to be, can you introduce me to X, Y, and Z? All you're going to do is start asking people whether or not they could make an introduction. I'll go talk to Michael. I'll talk to Jaime and Tago and be like, can you make the introduction? Can you make the introduction? Can you make the introduction? And when they say yes, you're going to be like, great. I'm going to launch my fundraise next month. I'll follow up with all the materials you need to make this as easy as possible. Once you line up all the willingness to make introductions, that's what gives you this bundled launching point, this point at the beginning where you can launch all your intros at once. That actually creates the initial calendar density. And when you do that, you get to line everyone up at the starting line, circle a date, and go. Okay. That is the key to that process. Tons of processes. Process is the key to fundraising. And we're pretty much getting to the end of today's content. What we've done is talked about 3 different components, 3 different mini processes, and they will move the needle. But what you'll realize as you start thinking about all these different things that you need to execute is, well, how does this all come together? Like, it's like actually now a little bit too much. It might be overwhelming. So that's what next time is all about. Next time, we're going to be focusing on What are the unlocks to execution? How do we get ourselves to get these things done? That'll be January 8th. And I hope to see you there. Couple things. We have another 10 minutes for Q&A. Would love for you guys to support the podcast. Follow me on Twitter, find me on LinkedIn. If you mention me in the workshop, I'll be able to filter you from the random spam bots that connect with me on LinkedIn and other places. And also, you should always figure out whether or not our accelerator program makes sense. Actually think about it more like a boot camp, getting you ready to fundraise. That starts at the end of January. But now let's open it up for Q&A. Feel free to ask any questions about what you've heard. This is one of my favorite parts. All right, I'm going to butcher your name, Beber.
You did not butcher the name, so.
Very good. Where in the world are you calling in from first?
Chicago.
Chicago, amazing.
Burbs.
Burbs. Okay. All right. What's your question?
So my question is, there's investor deck, but there's also the single one pager. You recommend building a one pager or starting that as the first something that you drop in?
So there are different schools of thought around this. I am less of the multiple versions of decks and one pagers. I want to make the 10 slide deck super simple, easy to go through. And my only differentiator is that when I send my deck around and I'm like, oh, people want to just take a quick look, who is Baber? I'll send the 10 slide deck without an appendix. When I go through my pitch, I'll have the deck ready. I'll have the appendix there. So if they have questions, I can refer to those slides in the appendix. And when I send them a deck after they've actually met me and heard my talk track, then I'll send it with the appendix. Some people like doing the one pager. I think your time is better spent making a really great, simple 10 slide deck. Great. Thanks for the question.
One more question.
Yep.
If I wanted to get somebody to look at my deck for response and remarks and like follow up, do you have somebody that you can recommend? Maybe you?
Oh, you're talking about for feedback.
Review, yeah, just look at it. Just give me a review.
Do you mean
I built one?
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. What I tell people is that a lot of people feel like they need to get an investor or an ex-investor or whatever to give feedback. And certainly that will be helpful. But what people don't realize is that investors are not that special. They're not that differentiated from you or other founders. And so getting feedback from other people and just having them describe what's confusing, what's exciting, what's interesting will be extremely valuable. Okay. Awesome. Let's go to Xavier. Oh, sorry. Was there someone trying to chime in?
Oh, I can go after. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm going to go Xavier, Alan, and then
Sarah.
Swindling.
Okay.
Sarah. Okay. Xavier, how are you?
Hey, how's it going, Jason? Good to meet you.
Yeah. Where in the world are you?
I'm in San Diego, California.
Very nice. Okay. What's your question?
So you mentioned, calendar density and booking, 50 meetings, 5 a day, basically for 2 weeks. Do you have any thoughts on, how you can get those, whether there's certain websites, whether you basically talk to everybody that you know and go about that way? Like, because if you have 50 meetings, it might take you, I don't know, potentially 100 people to talk to for 50 of them, maybe more. So it seems a little bit daunting. Obviously, you have much more experience than any of us on the call here. How would you go about kind of building that database?
I mean, you pretty much did the backwards math exactly right. I always give people a target of at least 100 target investors. So when you're doing your research, so this is part of the preparation process, is that you can't go into it being like, all right, I'm going to start fundraising. I got to get to calendar density. Well, how do I get to calendar density? Like I haven't talked to anyone yet. You got to work backwards from that. And you have to go first do research. It's like, what investors are even out there? What investors could I get to? And once you get that out there, you're mapping, okay, I've found like 135 names of investors. They happen to kind of have some connection to my network. And then I have to ask those people if they will give me introductions to those people. And you, like you said, actually, you won't have 100% yield on those requests. You're going to ask Alan to make an introduction to Sarah, and he's going to be like, no, sorry. Or, you know, and Baber's going to be like, I don't know her well enough. So if you guess that it's going to be, call it a 50% yield, and I usually use 50%, oops, did not mean to do that. If I use 50% as the number, I use 50% as the yield number, people are like, oh, won't most people say yes to an introduction request? And I think your closest friends certainly will, but when we push people into running that process, it's all about being super aggressive. You want to ask as many people as possible, even if it was like, oh, we went to grade school together. If that's the best intro you have in there, you're going to ask, right? And so your hit rate might not be, 80%. It'll probably be more like 50%. But yeah, it really is, Xavier, all about building up that big list, and it takes time. It takes time. That's one of the biggest things I can tell you. Okay?
But is the like, I get the going to 100 or 150 to get to 50, but are there specific circles or networks or research that you would do to get that list of 150? Because maybe some of us only know 50 potential investors.
Yeah.
How would you expand that circle?
Sure. I'll give you 2 or 3 quick thoughts around it, and some balloons. The first is that you would be shocked at how many people you are actually connected to that represent themselves as angel investors. That's a new explosion over the last few years. The second is your connectivity to an investor might feel far away. Like, oh my God, I actually don't know that many investors. But because you are a founder yourself, you are much closer to other founders, and founders happen to be connected to investors. So I would really think about your networks within other founders. And the third is you need to learn how to use the advanced search features of LinkedIn, like first degree searches, second degree searches, filtering by geographies, filtering by keywords. I don't know when our next workshop around investor research will be, but we've done workshops around that in the past. But those would be my 3 comments there. Okay, good question. Alan, how are you, man?
Hey, Jason, I'm good.
Alan, where in the world are you?
I am calling in from Gran Canaria, the Canary Islands.
No way. Very cool.
But normally I live in Sweden, so
I can, yeah.
you can appreciate why I'm here. So my question is, I'm curious to get your viewpoint on how helpful, if at all, being part of a known accelerator like Techstars or Y Combinator is in the process that you've been talking about tonight.
Great question. I have this essay. I think I have an essay on it. Jonathan, if you can see if I have that essay. My perspective on accelerators has certainly changed throughout the years. When I started my last company, I was kind of invited to apply to YC. People were like, oh, we know the partners there, you should apply. And I was like, I don't need that help. Accelerators are all about fundraising, and I'm very good at fundraising. But it turns out there are a couple of things. I do think, especially if you're a first-time founder, having some of that structure around you can be very helpful in all parts of your startup. And so on that side of things, I would say accelerators are worth exploring. And on the fundraising side of things, the best accelerators essentially create calendar density for you with demo day. So the short answer to your question is absolutely. Like YC obviously does that very well. I actually think the Techstars programs do that very well. And some of the other smaller programs that are more narrowly focused do that very well. They essentially bundle a bunch of investor interest, put it around one single day, that's demo day, and then your processes can start from there. That's calendar density. My one disclaimer to everyone is that if you go into an accelerator program, they set up an amount of calendar density for you. But if it's not YC, you should still put in effort into adding more on top of it to really, really bundle energy around that fundraise. But it's good. And then the last thing I already said the last thing, but one more thing to add on is make sure you do if you're not talking about YC or Techstars or maybe Grand Central in New York, there are a few others that are pretty well known and good. If you're looking at smaller accelerators or like accelerators that just started in the last like year or two, I'd definitely do some diligence on them. Make sure you talk to some founders who have been through their programs, see how quality the mentors are, see how quality their support around fundraising was, because they will take a chunk of your company. It's got to be worth it. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Great. No worries, Alan. Sarah, we have just enough time to go with you.
Oh, great. I was just wondering, I've heard, an approach of like socializing before you start fundraising to investors. And I was just curious what your thoughts there are, like, especially in this kind of market. Like, I'm just wondering what's the likelihood you really get a check from someone who's like really never met you until you're like officially fundraising. So yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, that's spot on. Most of my philosophies are sort of influenced by my own experiences and how I thought of things as an investor. But sometimes I'm like, am I crazy, or do I have to like double check this with other investors? And so I did a straw poll and was asking people, out of all the deals you did, like how many of those deals did you meet just as the process was starting? And it's like something like 10%. And this was when this was still at the tail end of a hotter market. To your point of, especially in this market, there is no longer, the things that I was seeing in 2021 where someone would hear about a deal on Thursday and have to wire by Monday in order to get it. That's gone. That's done. So absolutely, you're going to do as much as you can to create awareness of who you are and what your company is before you actually start fundraising. So much of the investing process, going back to the point of learning about the investing process, is investors becoming comfortable with Sarah and who Sarah is, right? And there's a well-known post by Mark Suster about lines, not dots. It's not about making a decision based on one point. It's about seeing multiple points. And so to the extent that you can do more where people at least secondhand hear about you, if not already meet you, that will make your fundraise go better. And what I would say is, when you think about fundraises that are shorter or longer, like call it 2 months on the fast side of things and 6 to 12 months on the longer side of things, 6 to 12 months is usually because people don't run a process and people don't know who the founder is. So the getting to know process part of the fundraise ends up being those first like 4 months. It's like, Sarah just reached out to me, never heard of her. I'm going to have a conversation with her and think about it and learn more about her. And then it kind of like drags on, and then people start hearing more about Sarah, and through that painful process, then get to know that she's actually a pretty competent founder. And then around the 5-month mark, things actually start rolling. That's my take on the longer processes. But if you did your groundwork and people are aware of you and you do run a process, you have a better opportunity to actually execute a process that works.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome. No worries. Okay. I am been pulling people a little bit past our quarter after mark. So if you guys have additional questions and want to email them in, let's do that. But day 2 is really where we want to spend more of our time. So I hope to see you guys on the 8th, next Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Thanks everyone for showing up, and I'm excited to keep this going. See y'all.
Cheers.
What's your number?